Good. Um, good evening, everyone. My name is Todd Hopman, and I'm with TRU, and I will be the moderator this evening. September is just around the corner. Many university students are trying to figure out how they will pay for their tuition this fall. This is why we are here tonight. We are here tonight to discuss university affordability in the COVID-19 era. There are resources that we will discuss this evening that you can take advantage of. While most classes will be conducted online this fall, TRU is able to draw upon its 42 years of experience providing online education to make the experience as engaging as possible for students. Tonight, I am pleased to be joined by Nathan Lane, TRU's Student Union Executive Director, along with two folks with me from TRU. So first of all, I'd love each of you to briefly introduce yourselves. And Nathan, why don't we start with you?
So as Todd said, my name is Nathan Lane. I'm the Executive Director at the Thompson Rivers University Student Union. So I work on services offered by the Student Union and support the elected Board of Student Representatives.
Gordon?
I'm Gordon Down. I direct student awards and financial aid for TRU, and our office provides support for basically any funding that a student is going to receive, from graduate to prep and loans, grants, etc. If you're receiving money to help with your education, it's flowing through us.
Cheryl?
I'm Cheryl Eagle. I'm a student awards advisor with Student Awards and Financial Aid. What I do is work directly with students to help them navigate the student aid systems, mostly British Columbia, and financial planning, pretty much any questions that they have navigating the systems for getting the student financing, student funding.
Great. Thank you, all three of you, for joining this important conversation this evening. The first question I want to ask and direct, first of all, to Gordon. We are experiencing a unique time that has come with various challenges for everyone in the TRU community. What advice would you have for students right now?
Todd, I would say don't conclude that you can't afford school just because you couldn't find work over the summer, or don't expect to find a part-time job in the fall. Even if you're shorter than you expected to be, there's more funding available this fall than usual.
And Nathan, what would you respond to that question about what advice you might have for students right now?
I'd say that probably the most important advice I have for students in the fall is that everyone in this community is going to be going through this same thing. So you definitely got to be proactive to try to make sure you get the information and the support you need. But also you got to recognize that the person on the other end of the phone taking your application, on the other end of your Blue Jeans course, is also a person in this community who has a family, who might be also doing this for the first time, and to be patient. Everybody is working as hard as they can to try to help you. So try to have some compassion and empathy for sort of what we're all going through.
And Nathan, that's a great point. I'm sure right now, sort of what we've been going through with COVID-19, all of us are learning a thing or two about patience. I wanted to ask, and I'll start this one with Nathan. Financial assistance and awards can be a real boost to student success. And Nathan, what has the Student Union implemented in recent years to assist students? And I have a follow-up question for Gordon when you're done.
Yeah, so I think that we've learned pretty clearly that student financial assistance is about choices. It determines what you can do. You can't make choices about things you do outside of the classroom, like taking a volunteer opportunity at the hospital or engaging in some kind of extracurricular club that helps you down the road. if you can't afford to pay your bills or rent. So that's the importance. In terms of what we've put in place, the student union basically has two kinds of financial aid. First, since 2005, we've had an endowment that provides at this point about 18 needs-based bursaries to students per year. And then we also have an emergency bursary fund, and that evolved out of a fire that actually happened in the community, where we realized that there was things that happened in the middle of the semester that just couldn't be planned for, and to try to support those things. So that's sort of the two types of financial aid that the student union provides.
Great. So Gordon, I'll ask you, what programs have you implemented to assist students?
Well, in addition to TRU's entrance scholarships and the work-study program that provides almost 100 part-time positions, the TRU Foundation provides student awards with over $1.5 million each year for returning students. And this year, brand new, there's funding for first-year students under the First-Year Student Resiliency Fund. But we also have a variety of other specialized grant programs, and where appropriate, fee deferrals, emergency loans and bursaries that Nathan touched on. And we can provide guidance in creating a financial plan, finding external awards, and even appealing or reassessing your government student loan and grant application.
There are many resources available, is what I'm hearing from both Nathan and you, Gordon. Cheryl, I had touched on it a minute ago, but why do you think that financial assistance for students is so important to student success?
Well, I think it's important on two fronts. The first one is when you know that you're able to look after yourself financially, it gives you a sense of security, and you can then concentrate on your academics. If you don't know, let's give an example. So if you're out studying and you're studying for your midterm, and you're at the library and you're starting to get tired, so you think, oh, I'm going to go get a cup of coffee. So you go to get a cup of coffee, and your debit card is declined. So now we have stress on top of, we have financial stress on top of academic stress. Now you can't concentrate on your study anymore. Now you're worried about what's happening in your bank account. So in order for students to be able to focus on their academics, making a solid financial plan, knowing where your money is going to come from, is really important for that sense of security and self-sufficiency, and for lowering your own stress.
And Nathan, I'm curious. I know I had sort of touched on this before, but what do you hear from students on campus about how, based on what Cheryl said, what do you hear from students in terms of how student awards and the financial assistance piece, both from TRU and the student union, how does that make them feel, or what do they say about that kind of the impact on their education?
Yeah, so I think the best example is often one of the practices from the foundation is to have a letter from the students that receive financial aid send back out to people who provided. And I can tell you, after looking at those for probably 10 years, they all say the same thing. The first thing they say is thank you. And the second thing they say is it allowed me to. It allowed me to not have to worry about childcare. It allowed me to take the part-time job that's connected to my program because I didn't have to pay the bills. And I think that is the biggest thing we hear, is that people get to make choices about the part-time work they take or the study groups they join that are in the interest of their education, not only in the interest of, I got to take the job that has the most hours and the most money, even though it might not be as good as the one that will help me down the road, because financial aid allows them to make those choices in a way that's more about their university experience than just about meeting their needs. And I think that we see that in almost every response or feedback we get from students.
This sort of, based on what you said, obviously there's a lot of students that are looking for some financial awards right away. And so I was wondering, Cheryl, what are some immediate financial awards that students can apply for right now?
Right now, the TRU Foundation Awards application is open. It opened on August 1st and it will be closing September 18th. So this is the 1.5 million approximately that Gordon referred to. It is one application in a student's MyTRU account. And it's one application for the vast majority of the awards.
And I'm going to throw this one to you, Nathan. Are there, I know you've touched on it perhaps, but are there emergency funds available for students? And I know you had touched on that. So what are those specifically?
Yeah, so I know there are some available for specific demographics through the institution. Through the student union, in March of last year, we made available $100,000 of emergency funds, which I believe there will be carryover into the fall. And then on a regular basis, we make a contribution each year of about $10,000. And we'll be monitoring that in the fall in terms of ensuring that students have the funds they need to make it through as this pandemic evolves and changes, and as the situation related to other types of funding, whether that's federal or provincial funding, starts to wind down.
There's a handful of clearly there's a handful of awards that students can apply for in the case of an emergency, and I'm just curious, Cheryl, what are some of the emergency funds that are available from TIU specifically?
I suppose the main two are the TRUSU emergency bursary. That the key with that one is that it must be an unforeseen circumstance. There's a vast difference between a lack of planning and an unforeseen circumstance. So there's always a conversation. A student will come in and speak with an awards advisor, and we'll go over what resources can be brought to bear to help the student solve this problem. Another one is when a student has applied for their student loan and one thing or another has happened and the funding is delayed. So that students living, the money that they were going to use for rent and food is coming in, but it's delayed. It won't be in time for their rent. So we have an emergency bridging loan that's available then when you have an approved student loan.
And I'll maybe throw this next question out to any one of the three of you. For students that are, maybe they're applying for awards, they're doing everything they can to make sure they set themselves up well financially for the fall, and they're nervous, they're anxious, and what would your advice be if you were sitting right in front of any student that could be watching this right now, either to the student or to the parent? What would you say to them if they're in that space?
Can I take this one?
For sure.
I say, come talk to me. And normally we would meet in person in the office. We would go over the plan. What does it look like financially? What are your expenses? What money's coming in? Let's put the picture together. And once you know, there's less stress. If you know that you're short $1,000 for the semester, well, let's start looking for that $1,000. Or if you know you can make it, you also have that plan now that we built together for how to get through. So the answer to how to stop worrying is to make a plan.
Do either of the two of you have anything to add on that? We can move on, but do either of you want to say anything to that question?
Yeah, I would just say that for students who are, I think definitely we know that students are struggling and it's been a really hard time, but I would say generally that in my day-to-day conversations across the campus, there are a wide range of people who are committed to the idea that the measure of success of COVID is going to be how our people make it through this. That the campus isn't really about buildings or desks, or it's about students and staff. And so I would say that if you're unsure about whether you can be here in the fall or whether you can make it through. You just got to get connected to somebody, and we'll do everything we can to try to make that happen. I think that the commitment is pretty high in terms of what I see from the institution to make sure that as many people as want to be here can be here, and as many that get here can make it through this semester. I think it's just a matter of getting people connected to the right people and places.
Mm-hmm. Excellent point. I wanted to ask one more question, and then there's a couple of questions that have come through. And so my question, I guess I'll throw this one to you, Cheryl. As we approach September, and I know you've touched on some of these points, but what are your top 2 pieces of advice for students?
In terms of preparing for financially for the semester, first of all, talk to us. Pick up the phone and call us. Like Nathan said, we're all committed to students. TRU has a staff of creative problem solvers. So whatever issue is standing in front of you as a student, and you just don't know how you're going to get around this, come talk to us, or phone us, obviously, because you can't. We'll, if whomever you're speaking to can't help you solve the problem, that person probably knows someone to refer you to who has a different set of skills or scope of practice. And the second part, as a student, as you're going through your Student Aid BC application process, it can feel tricky and it can feel obscure, and you can get stuck at points and think, this is so frustrating, I quit. But don't quit. Give us a call and we'll help you navigate it. So reach out is my second.
Great. Thanks for that important advice. We have a couple questions from YouTube, and I think I'll start with one. This question is from someone named Sharon. Sharon asks, with there being limited job opportunities to help students fund their education right now, are there roles at the university? But I guess I'll sort of broaden that and just ask, if there are students who are looking for job opportunities right now and they're struggling to find that, do any one of you have any advice for those students?
Maybe I'll jump in. So I'd just say over the summer, that was one of our big priorities. We were actually really excited to be able to partner with Career Education. So we were able to launch a program called Careerworks that essentially created 25 jobs for students, which doesn't seem all that monumental, but it was 25 jobs that didn't exist and that existed in the local community. So that it supported local not-for-profits or businesses being able to reopen. It was a great partnership. Career Ed provided the expertise, local businesses provided the job, the student union provided some funding, and we're very happy with it, and we think that it made a big difference for those students. In terms of the fall, I think that a lot of the operating practices in terms of what will and won't be open are still being worked through, including in our own building. But I think that as those start to flesh themselves out, there will be opportunities for student employment. And I think that this will be a really important time for campus to hire our own students, to be able to say, when it's hard to get a job anywhere else, it's not hard at TRU, because we know that's a good long-term investment in investing in our own students. So I suspect that as we get closer to fall, there'll be some opportunities in the student union to work part-time and help us manage the building, ensure social distancing, and do some of those things that will come up throughout the year. And I hope that there's those opportunities in a lot of other departments as well.
Gordon or Cheryl, do you have anything to add on that particular question?
Yeah, I had mentioned a work-study program, which is, even though it's employment, it's considered a financial aid program because you have to demonstrate need in order to be eligible to apply for any of the positions. And normally that's around or close to 100 positions. We're in the process of seeing how many of those, as many as possible, that we can move to remote positions. So just as back in the spring, all of the staff and faculty at TRU were transitioning their jobs to be remote. And there was lots of working through that. Now we're doing the same thing with the work study positions in each of the supervisors to see how we can move those jobs to working from home. So there'll be more information to come on that.
So a few more questions, I think. I know that all of you had touched on a lot of different bursaries and funds that were available. Someone here is asking whether there are additional funds available for students during COVID. So I would imagine that this question is sort of trying to get to whether or not the provincial or federal governments have opened up funds for students to apply for. I personally don't know the answer to that, but I don't know if one of you might know the answer to that.
So the federal government has extended their need-based grants program for at least 1 year. I'm not familiar, maybe Cheryl, you would know. I don't know if there's been any announcement from the provincial government in terms of additional grants that are available. There was, as I said before, from the student union and also from the provincial government and from TRU World, some one-time funds made available to bridge people through winter who were struggling, and I don't suspect there will be additional provincial funds in the fall. I don't know internally. I think that there's been a resiliency fund that's new for students, and I know the student union is sort of monitoring to see how the fall semester goes, and I think there will likely be some additional funds that the board of directors will make available, but that's the best of my knowledge, sort of, in terms of what might be available come fall.
By far, the biggest source of additional funding is the federal grants and loans. So for an 8-month study period, there's up to an additional $3,000 in grants and significantly more in loans. So typically, for an 8-month period, a single student in an academic program or even vocational would receive a maximum of about $10,800. A high need student at the very top end would get up to $12,800. This year, that's around $17,500. There's quite a bit of extra money there. In fact, one of our side concerns is that with all that extra money this year, that first year students don't accidentally think that's how much is available every year, because the plan is in fall of 21 that it go back to the standard of what it was, but they've put a lot of extra on the table to basically replace potentially a lot of lost summer employment or part-time earnings through the year.
Thank you, both of you, for that answer. I'm sure it's very helpful to those that might be watching this. So I know there's another question here, and I understand with international students and with those doing masters, some of the financial assistance questions are a bit different. But I'm wondering, there's a person here asking whether or not there's any financial assistance for international students, and this particular person is studying for a master's. I think I know the answer to this, but I'm not the expert, so I was wondering if Gordon, you might have any insight on this?
Sure. In general, in normal times, we do not have need-based assistance for international students because Immigration Canada requires them to demonstrate before they come that they have sufficient funds. Of course, they are eligible for all scholarships, awards, prizes, and other merit-based funding. We did have, for the first time, need-based funding for international students in the spring related to COVID. We're still in discussions with TRU World around what that will look like for fall.
Okay.
Yeah, I know
And as far as, I should just say, as far as master's programs, all the money, the loans and grants and everything we've been talking about for undergraduate is also there for graduate. And there are other varieties of grant funding that they would all flow through our office. So although a lot of the decision making around those is done by research and grad studies.
Nathan, you sound like you
Yeah,
want
I
to
was
say
going
something.
to say that I think that there are all sorts of sort of structures that talk about what international students may or may not have, and I don't want to go down that road. I would just say that in terms of the decisions that the board of directors at the student union made is there's no limits on who that funding went to in terms of supporting an emergency. It wasn't for domestic or international or graduate. It was across the board, and we trust that the people in financial aid assist us in getting that money to the people who need it most. And I think that my experience is that generally did happen in March, and I suspect that's what will happen again in the fall.
So I have another question here from someone that's asking, are all of these grants, bursaries, or scholarships also available for students based out of BC but preferring to study remotely online? So to me, it sounds as though that would be for I guess students, whether or not there was any bursaries for students who were out of province at the moment or out of country for some international students. Gordon or Cheryl, is that something you can answer?
Yeah, it's the definitions this year are going to be a little tricky because you could be a campus student who is, because everything is, so many programs are remote, choose to stay at home in Ontario or Alberta. And so we'd be treating you like a campus student. And then we have our regular open learning. We have 14,000 students studying at a distance all the time, any year. And I think the simplest point to make is that the majority of our funding is for full-time students, so those taking at least 9 credits, completing at least 9 credits or 3 courses per semester. Now, if you're enrolled part-time, as the large majority of open learning students are, there is also some part-time grant funding, but it would be covering just your direct educational costs. It wouldn't address living.
Okay.
Nathan, did you want to add anything to that?
No.
Okay.
Okay. And actually, Cheryl, I was going to ask you. I know we've touched on the impact of student financial assistance, and I wanted to ask whether you had sort of a practical example that you could give of the impact of financial assistance on students.
I can give a general example, and
It's
kind of a math-based example. Some of our awards, the smaller ones, are $500 when you apply for one of our TRU Foundation Awards. So if we look at $500 and you think, oh, a $500 award, that's barely worth doing the application. Then if we do the math and we think about what minimum wage is, and then we think of how many hours you have to work to earn that, then it's around 34 hours of time that you can now spend studying and doing a rocking job on that paper instead of out working.
Nathan, did you have any sort of, I guess, examples, specific examples that you've come across where students have received or applied for financial assistance, and then the impact on that student? I'm sure you've heard some stories like this, so I was curious if you had any that you could share.
Yeah, I would say that where I think we've talked a lot about the ability for people to focus on their program. And I think that there's generally a perception, and I think it's probably the truth, that respiratory therapy is a very, very hard program. We hear repeatedly from students that financial aid is the difference between whether or not you can focus on your academic workload or not. I think that's the most tangible example that we hear from students, where whether or not you get financial aid makes a world of difference in your program. And we hear that across the board, but I would say most specifically, we hear it in respiratory therapy.
And there's a handful of other questions here. I'm just giving a quick glance through them, and I know this is probably one that can't be answered by any one of us, actually, but there's a question, I think, in terms of travel restrictions, and whether those could be, how those could impact students even into, say, December, January coming up. But I know, Gordon, that my understanding is that the federal government has permitted students to do up to 2 years remotely at their home if they're international students. I'm not sure if you can speak to that, but I'm just curious what the status of that is.
That's my general understanding, but I wouldn't want to say anything definitive because, yeah, that's
Okay.
outside of. Now, what I would say is, as far as domestic students go, we don't really care where you physically are. This year or any year, you would be eligible for the same funding. And the same would be true of, let's say in a typical year, an open learning student that happened to do a placement in, we had student ABC call up one time and said, we found out this student was in Peru. And we said, yeah, that's part of their program and that's where they're studying. And so they're meeting all the requirements and they're eligible for all the funding regardless of where they are. Now, we don't generally cover the cost of travel to get there and back, but
there's another question here that either Gordon or Nathan might be able to answer. There's a question, can you please expand regarding the funding available for part-time students?
So maybe I can just say, and I think in terms of eligibility, and then I'll turn it over to you guys, is there are no restrictions on the one-time funding that we provided. So at this point, it doesn't matter if you're domestic, international, part-time. We haven't restricted that funding in any way. There was no earmarks attached to it. So at least there will be some funding available. And the funding that will be allocated in the fall hasn't been provided yet. So there's still the opportunity for us to connect with financial aid. And if there are significant gaps, whether it's part-time or international, to fill those, to make sure those funds are best used where they can be needed. So we try not to put a lot of restrictions on who gets our money, because financial aid best can tell us who needs it based on who's applying. And then we work with those experts to make sure our money can do the most good from the student union. So that's our approach to how we decide who gets or doesn't get funding.
Gordon, do you have anything to add, or Cheryl?
I can speak to the part-time student loan and grant program. So a student taking up to 8 credits would be eligible for the part-time student loan or grant. It can be a combination of loan and grant. You can specify with this part-time program. And it's designed to, so if you're taking part-time courses, then the assumption is that you would have more time available to work. So then it doesn't cover the living expenses, but it covers the tuition and the books and a small, I forget the word, a small amount extra. So it's designed to, you're working, but you don't quite make enough money to pay tuition. So then you can apply for the student part-time grant. and loan program. You can borrow up to $10,000 at a time in the loan portion, and the grant portion just renews each year, each academic year.
And the good thing this year only with that grant, normally it's capped at $1,800 per year. This year they're doubling that to $3,600. So there's quite a bit more available without having to take out any loans.
I'm curious, and any one of you can answer this, but for students who are reviewing and researching the various scholarships and bursaries and financial assistance programs, how do they know which programs to apply for? Where do they even start?
I think
they call us.
Yeah.
But I think the best bet is to just invest some time educating themselves, learning, being a student of financial aid for, just reserve a few hours over some time to navigate around our website and explore some of the links that are provided there, kind of build a better understanding. And then once you've read the website and you have further questions, you don't feel it answers your questions, then talk to us and we can take it from there. But it's always surprises me or it's disappointing to hear when students haven't done that. I remember talking to it was actually a TRU employee who was also a TRU alum. And we were walking around and talking, and she said, "Oh, I was a transfer student. I came into TRU with credit from another institution." And I asked her about her GPA and how that worked. And then I said, "Oh, and what funding did you apply for?" And she said, "Oh, I didn't." And I didn't, at that point, have the heart to tell her that she could have qualified for a $5,000 Barber transfer and a $2,000 transfer scholarship from us. Mm-hmm. So she didn't ask, she didn't explore, and so she didn't get it.
I'm curious, I know that there's various numbers that have been thrown out from all three of you, but Nathan or Gordon, do either one of you, are you able to answer how much students can expect to receive?
Well, I mentioned the caps for student loans and grants. As far as the general bursary and awards application that's open right now, that ranges, the funding coming from that would be anywhere from $500 to $5,000. But if we look over all students who receive anything, the average would be somewhere over 1,000, 1,100, somewhere in there. So it's quite a range depending on so many factors.
Yeah, I think that I looked just in preparation for this evening, and I think of the 18 that went out last year, they from the student union, they ranged between $700 and $1,000.
Okay.
And then if you look at the total that we disperse in a year from any source of grant and scholarships, bursaries, non-repayable funding, we would disperse about $5.5 million a year to TRU students.
That's an impressive amount of money to students, for sure. There was a few questions about folks that wanted to get help with application, and I know, Cheryl, I'm really hoping that you have more emails coming in, because there were folks that watched this and then followed up. But for those folks who have no idea what to do, they need to talk to somebody, they prefer to come in person, but obviously that's not an option right now. Do you mind sharing a phone number and a website, even, or an email address that students can contact if they need to?
Absolutely. I think the best place for a student to go is tru.ca/awards. So /AWARDS. Go there and start to look through the information that we have. there's a contact us page, and it has all of our contact information there.
How about Nathan, if there's students that are aware of Student Union and funds, how do they get in touch with folks?
Yeah, I would say that they could get information about those at financial aid, but if they still have any questions, they're welcome to get in touch with us by just emailing info@truesioux.ca or calling 250-828-5289. That's forward to a cell phone that somebody is basically staffing 24 hours a day. So I know Gordon talked a little bit about, certainly we want people to be proactive, but more important than that, we don't want people to give up. So if you are struggling, just call us. We'll get you to the right place. We will make sure that happens. It's a large number of people, so it's not always as immediate, I think, as it might feel, but we're not going to let anybody not get responded to.
I know that we're approaching the 45-minute mark here soon, and we've answered most of the questions through the chat box. But I wanted to, maybe as we wrap up, and I'll throw this question to all three of you. There's been lots of facts and figures and advice that all three of you have shared this evening. But I'm wondering, what's the one piece of advice that if students or parents were watching this, what's the one piece of advice that you want to leave with those students or parents? Cheryl?
I think in the 2 years that I've been a financial aid advisor, I think the worst thing that someone will do is assume that they're not eligible. And that goes for making an appeal with student aid as well. If they've been declined for student aid, student will just accept, oh, they said no to me. But we should dig deeper and find out why. And if they have a legitimate appeal, we can appeal, and then they can be reinstated for funding and carry on with their education. So best not to assume that you're not eligible.
Yeah.
How about you, Gordon or Nathan?
Go ahead, Gordon.
I would say make sure you have a fairly accurate grasp on your costs as well. So what do you anticipate? Do you know in an average month how much you spend or will spend on rent and food and entertainment? And because we can talk about what resources you can get, but the other half of the equation is what your costs are. And we're looking at it from both angles, both how can we get you more money, but also how can we help you reduce your costs and look at different things you're doing, transportation, living situations, and adjust those. So if you're coming in to talk to us, or even before that, get a sense of know your costs.
And Nathan, before you answer that question, there was somebody here that was asking if you could repeat the phone number
Yeah.
that you gave.
250-828-5289. And that's the phone number to the student union. So you can find it just by going to contact us at truesioux.ca as well. Okay, and then I'm up, I think.
Go ahead with your advice, if you sort of last minute advice that you might have.
I would say that my advice to students coming into this fall is, I think that one of the things that, especially when things are confusing and sort of scary, students take the approach that TRU or education happens to them and that it's about asking and getting an answer. And I would say that I think students are going to be much better served in this fall by thinking of education as happening with them, that you're the expert on what your living situation is, how you're experiencing the classroom, how the campus can best meet your needs. And if you don't communicate that, we can't make it better. I think that at the student union, we're trying to encourage students to say, you got to tell us what's not working. And I can't always promise that we'll do something about it, but I can certainly promise that we'll listen and do our best to try to resolve it. And I think there's hundreds of other people over the summer who, as we've been talking to them, have been saying the same thing. But I would say to students, you got to tell us what's going on and you got to engage. This is going to be a little scary for all of us. We need you to tell us what's working or not working so that we can correct things where we can as quickly as possible. That would be my advice.
Before we wrap up, does anyone have anything else to add that I haven't asked about? Cheryl?
I would, this sounds really simple, but I'm going to say it anyways. When you phone someone at TRU and you don't get an answer, leave them a message. That is, we're working from our homes, and we are happy to help you resolve whatever situation is going on for you. But if you're calling and saying, I'm not getting an answer, okay, leave us a message and give us a chance to respond. So be patient with us.
That patience seems to be the theme during COVID. In general, patience seems to be the theme. Before we wrap it up, one last call for anybody else. Any other comments? I don't see any other questions from everyone, but any other comments from you, Gordon, for instance?
I would just say maybe. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No,
I would just say one thing you said earlier, Todd, was about travel restrictions. And I think that there's definitely been a lot of conversations going on campus about how there will be wraparound services to support international students as it becomes possible for them to transition from maybe where they are now to somewhere in the community. But I would say that I think that there's also a pretty deep commitment to help transition domestic students who might be making the decision about when do I come and when is the right time, and or parents who are wondering about that same conversation. And I would say that if you're concerned about the wraparound student or services that might be available, definitely call and talk to us, because I think we want to make sure that we have in place the stuff about that you're going to need when you get here, whether that's this September, January, or who knows when. And it's important we don't hear as much from domestic students about what's impacting those decisions. So I'd say certainly that's an area where I think we're looking for some feedback.
Great. I finally just want to thank all three of you for your time this evening. And again, if anyone is watching this, please do not hesitate to reach out to TRU or to TRU Student Union. Contact information was shared earlier, and please do reach out to either the Student Union or to TRU and folks like Gordon and Cheryl. Everyone is very happy to help those that are in need, and or those that just have questions. Please do reach out. And if there's any other further questions, please don't hesitate also to use the chat box. We'll monitor those over the next day or two to make sure there's any other questions that might need to be answered. But again, thank you everyone for participating and attending, and have a safe and healthy summer. And we hope to see everyone, and or I should say, when I say see, I mean we'll see you virtually in September. And have a wonderful summer, everyone, and do reach out, please. Thanks.
Thanks, Todd.